off the phone.
Okay, yep, I'm just gonna record it for people who can't be here who are interested.
Oh, there he is.
Ah,
I don't know that. How'd you get here so fast?
We're recording. I can't say that. So, yeah, let's start in on where we're at. So just a quick overview. The copy that we sent around yesterday, and we've got some copies here with us that we'll send around the table. We're really at what we're calling like a 60% draft of our matrix and technical memo. So there are certainly still aspects that we're working through, but we certainly wanted to get this version out to give folks an idea of the direction we're headed and give us some opportunity to talk it through today. We had, as several of you folks were there, we had a field day back in September, was it only? Field day back in September where we had done a desktop analysis prior to that of potential sites for structural BMPs in the watershed, and narrow those down. And then on our field walk in September, really look through and kind of brainstorm between all of us the potential BMPs that we're looking at for certain sites, which we try to incorporate. Those are incorporated in our draft matrix here. In the back, Jane, is our table of the draft matrix. What we really want to talk about is there's we don't necessarily need to go through all the BMP sites, but what we did want to talk about is we're looking at, from the TMDL estimates, we're looking at a pretty considerable pollutant load reduction that would be required within the watershed. And with our initial estimates of these BMPs, yeah, there we go. The key takeaway, without going through this entire table, is with these BMPs, there's really only a fraction of the total required load reduction that we estimate could be achieved through these structural BMPs. You can see kind of in the middle there under implementation, there's the estimated TP load reduction. Yeah, exactly. So we're talking on the order of, in terms of a total load reduction that would be needed watershed wide, we're talking about tens of pounds. And here we're looking at between all of those, in a perfect world, our estimates now are between, down towards the bottom there, 2.5 to 4.5 pounds of load reduction. So one of the things we want to bring up today is basically, and as you'll see in the constraints column towards the right side there, really what we're dealing with the structural BMPs in the watershed is the actual space, as Bill mentioned in the email yesterday, the actual space that we have around the road right away and within the road right away to be installing some of these things. As we were going through, that seemed to be really the confining feature, that when we were out in the field, a lot of these spots don't have a lot of area where we'd be able to size something appropriately to be able to treat the potential drainage area. So that's a quick overview of our review of the structural BMPs. Now, I think it's important to say early on too, that this is, part of what we're still working on is the non-structural BMPs. And also to keep in mind that this is what we're trying to pull together is between structural and non-structural. I think we see here, there's going to have to be a variety of practices, best management practices, structural, non-structural, that and potentially in-lake treatments that would have to be combined kind of in a holistic approach to pond restoration. So that's not to say that some of these structural BMPs aren't worthwhile, but the point being that all of these are going to have to be kind of taken in part and part of an entire plan between structural and non-structural and potentially some in-lake alternatives. So I guess my point is we haven't yet found a silver bullet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the cost, guys, and again, it's
Right.
not obviously, and I'm like, oh my God. I mean, here I am like, killing myself over 75 grand. And I look at this number, it's like, my God. I don't know how we're gonna achieve it, but we'll see.
One step at a time.
That's right.
But we do need to, it's gonna be a 15, 20-year process.
Approach. Right.
Some of the obvious choices right off the bat, is the boat launch and the beach area is, we target those as high priority.
Right.
Even those have costly. So, it's trying to do maybe at least one a year, or, one every other year, or,
Right.
yeah, we have to build up funding and we have to, look for sources of funding.
Yeah. I'm thinking like capital reserve funds every year will be a warrant article or something, will be part of the budget. Because it's kind of required. It's not like, that's been the biggest issue, but I don't know. I'm just thinking like even 75 grand a year, it's going to be hard to accumulate. Is there going to be any funding from this from the state at all, or the feds to help out with this, or no? Like any grants or any, like loan forgiveness program?
There is the Clean Water, Stormwater State Revolving Fund
Yeah.
that, is provided as loans, but there is some forgiveness, like
20%, 20-30%.
grand forgiveness, depending on the year. So that is an obvious source to tap into. And that usually comes out spring, they're asking for applications.
Now, when we're done with Robinson, is it like, what is the intent here, Bill? Is this to go to Atonic? Is it the river? Like, well, what's the deal here? After we're done here, for example, like, what's the next stop? Is this Robinson the only one, or is it Robinson, then Atonic, and then the river? How does it? what is this subject to, the phosphorus reduction?
I like your optimism that we might get done.
Right, right.
Well, I don't know, did you,
So this grant funding is covering, looking at Robinson Pond.
Just Robinson Pond.
Yeah, for this specific grant and project,
Right.
just looking at Robinson Pond.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking for the MS4 permit itself, and like, once we're done with this one, with the expectations to be tackling other water bodies in town? Or is just Robinson? right?
yes, yes, other impaired water bodies.
Got it.
But it's the TMDL that puts a bigger emphasis on this water body, as the permit. The permit requires a specific phosphorus control plan for the MS4 purposes, which would be similar, it's parallel to the water quality protection plan that you're developing. So in that plan, MS4 side of things has certain targets in certain years. It does provide 15 years of implementation, but
Let's see.
like Oderneck does not have a TMDL. It should still be addressed, but there aren't specific target reductions.
For that, okay,
Robinson.
got it. All right, so it sounds like Robinson will be our main focus right now, at least for a while. Okay,
Yeah, and as Garrison said, this is gonna take multiple approaches.
all right,
The structural is one thing, and we do need to focus on, but as you can see, you can only get so much in so much treatment and capture so much water.
right,
Then there's, non-structural, which street sweeping and catch basin cleaning is part of that. And we talk about that in the memo. Even then, it's increments of reductions, 1 pound, go to, more efficiency to 3 pounds, more efficiency, maybe you get up close to 10 pounds would be the most you might get.
right,
Catch basin cleaning, and then there are other things that are public education pieces that, educating on better shoreline management. We put some suggestions in here about workshops and maybe have an award program for the best shoreline kind of thing, which they do in other
Yeah.
places. What else we got?
so this
Regulations.
report, Bill, this report is gonna have an inventory of all the projects that could be done, but not the actual design, correct? The town will have to pursue that if they, adopt this, obviously, right?
Yeah, the next step was the engineering component, getting a more
Uh.
detailed engineering work out, sizing these BMPs. Sorry, you're joking?
Huh?
It sounded like you were choking.
Me? No. No choking here. Go ahead.
So, yeah, there is an engineering component. And then I think there's a role for, Conservation Commission and then the Regional Planning Commission on the non-structural side. Other stakeholders, pushing the educational piece and the regulation updates.
Yeah. I saw something about the wetland buffer maybe being bumped up to 100 feet versus 50.
Yeah,
Something from the land use. Now, you know that they tried that in the past, right? Something with like the prime wetlands in town versus regular wetlands. It didn't go anywhere. I'm wondering if that's worth pursuing now in town. There's gonna be a lot of pushback, obviously, from people, developers and special interests and all that. But I'm wondering if it's worth opening it up. And obviously, we'll be planning and zoning. I would not be surprised if a lot of people come in favor of that, to be honest with you, because they're gonna see it as a potential to start reducing the development in town, or the potential for that. So I
Yeah, I mean, Garrison and I were talking about this. I mean, a lot of the shoreline property is already developed, so there's not much you're gonna do about new development, but existing development is sort of grandfathered,
right,
any further setbacks, but there is maybe a way to, encourage more wooded vegetation or or even just inspecting septic systems, during real estate transactions, and in getting an inventory of what's out there now, what's been done, what's the status now. But you're obviously not going to be able, you're not pushing people back that are already there.
right. But still, even for the new ones, for the new areas, subdivisions, there's quite a bit of wetlands in town. I'm wondering how that would be. How would they react to that? I invited Brian, the town planner, to this meeting, but he's got other things going on, I guess. So I'm gonna talk to him again. The mechanism will be the same, Bill. The same mechanism would change the rules at the planning board, to tighten things up when it came to, certain things that people were required to do for the drainage and the runoffs and stormwater and all that. So I can see the same mechanism being utilized for wetland buffer. I personally like it to have a bit more than 50 feet, because I see a lot of problems out there with especially zoning violations, because people will put the building 50 feet away from the buffer, from the wetland, which is 50 feet. And they'll say, yeah, I'm outside of the building. I'm outside of the wetland buffer. And then 2-3 years down the road, they'll put like some kind of patio in the back and other things, and it becomes a violation. They're like, well, it's behind my house. What do you want them to do? And in a way, I'm like, you shouldn't have let these people put it at 50 feet away anyways, because it's like, how's it? Makes no sense. You're letting someone put a house right behind a wetland, basically, and then you turn around and tell them can't use the backyard. Right. So I don't know.
So I think that's kind of the crux of what we're talking about, Elvis, too, is that sort of the difference between the state and town regulations is
right.
With the wetland conservation district in town, it just extends to that 50 feet.
Correct.
There can, as we know, there can still be structures within that 50 feet, obviously, that were grandfathered in and everything, but
correct.
We lose our ability to try to encourage less land clearing or more canopy cover, because that district doesn't extend beyond 50 feet. So if it were say 100 feet, and we could put in some language around, areas, there aren't contiguous areas, shouldn't be clear cut, or to maintain vegetation buffers in that area. Doesn't necessarily mean that it could be structured, obviously, however the planning board wants to, but it doesn't necessarily mean that has to be a structure setback, but there's already a structure there. There could be some language around vegetation clearing or other stormwater management or treatment that would be beneficial, but we don't really have a mechanism to do that under the wetland conservation district, because it's only 50 feet right now.
Yeah, I hear you.
also, you know, to address the whole town issue, I mean, you know, we could put in these more more stringent things as an overlay district on the watershed. You know, so it's not applied to the entire town. But it's not to say it's not wise to do it for the town as well, but if that becomes the issue, you know, maybe it's Robbins Pond and Odenek Pond and any other sensitive water body. It's
So like create a district, right? The Robinson Pond District maybe. So anything adjacent to that or anything on it or anything that could be impacting that. I'm just wondering if we start small, I guess. Or just be a pain though, because we've got to keep track of it. I mean, to be honest with you, I'd rather just have it applied everywhere. But that might be too much. I don't know though, it's a little different, you know, when they did this a long time ago, they didn't have much say. You know, a lot of people, you know, special interests will come in and crush everything. It's a little different now. I don't know. I like it. I know other towns in New Hampshire have that. I know in Mass they have that. That's kind of like everywhere over there when I used to do septic systems and developments in the private sector. But I know even in New Hampshire now, a lot of towns are picking up the 100-foot. I don't know. I gotta talk to Brian, I guess, to see if he's willing to do the work. It's easy for me to say, yeah, this sounds great, you should do it, but he's gonna be the one doing all the work. I don't see anything wrong with that, though. I like the buffer even more, but I can see a lot of people saying it's gonna create now less development, which I don't know. Depends who you ask, I guess, if it's a good thing or not, but.
better development.
Huh?
Better development.
Although the developers are gonna complain about it, but people that don't want to see as much or the cluster or the density, they might say, how's that a bad thing? You know what I mean? So it depends who you ask. You know, you talk to developers, they want to maximize on that, you know, more the merrier, because, you know, it's all in the numbers. But I think this creates a little bit of a, you know, just space between, you know, bigger lots, if it's not going to be put into the numbers. I don't know. I can see this. I can see this going either way. The question I have is, you know, is everyone willing to do the work? I guess to see if we'll go anywhere. Yeah, let me. I forward this to Brian and Bruce, planning and zoning, and I'll report back to what I hear from them to see if they're willing to pick this up. I'll let you know.
Yeah, you know, as you said, take it in steps.
Yeah.
But this
If
is
it doesn't
not,
go anywhere, yeah, if it doesn't go anywhere, it's fine, but I'm just wondering if it might be worth trying, but I don't know, we'll see.
it's not like we're pushing unprecedented.
No. And the problem is, even if you do the buffer, you know, they're gonna give them waivers or they're gonna give them relief anyways. It's like sometimes I wonder why we even have the rules in place to begin with, but whatever.
Some of these things we're suggesting are already in the state.
Right.
Especially apply it to smaller projects, smaller redevelopment thing. It's
Right.
Same standards.
Right. No, I thought it was reasonable. What else? Because I gotta leave in about a couple minutes. I gotta jump to the other meeting. Anything else? When do you think, like, what do you expect, Bill? Do you expect some feedback from us and then you go into the next stage, which is like 75% completion of this draft? Like, what do you envision here? Now that this, you know, now that you're going through this. The next one, tying things up. Do you expect us to say yes to this, no to that, and then get a more complete draft? What's the plan? What do you envision?
Go ahead, Garrison.
Well, so this, I mean, we could use any feedback you have, Elvis.
Yeah,
You know, if some things look more reasonable than others, that would be helpful in us narrowing things down. As far as this exact project, you know, this is deliverable to the planning commission to work on, to incorporate into an overall watershed protection plan that presumably will kind of build in some other aspects of watershed protection. So, you know, this is really being provided to the planning commission, and we want to make sure that it's accurate and reasonable. And if there are things that you could start working on now, all the better.
Right.
So I guess what we're looking for at this stage is just feedback on what you think is feasible, and keeping in mind that, you know, this may be 10, 15, 20 years worth of work here.
Yeah.
But we want to get a sense of what's reasonable to be implementing within the watershed for water quality protection.
Elvis,
Go ahead.
and obviously the low hanging fruit for us is the catch basins in the sweeping. That's stuff that we can get going on right away in the spring, to at least get that low hanging fruit. Those are easy things.
Jim, you had mentioned whether, you know, the town wants to purchase one or whether you want to contract that out. I don't know. Yeah.
What's
Plan
it-
to do a cost analysis on that. I don't know.
At the very least, we'd use what we have for current equipment with the Vector truck and with the sweeper that we have. We're not gonna have the funding to go forward to buy a new sweeper, but we can look at the rental of the sweeper, as has been mentioned.
Yeah.
Elvis mentioned, I think, just before you walked in, that he did get some additional funds already for sweeping.
Yeah, 20 grand bill from DPW, additional 20 grand for sweeping, and an additional 75 grand for physical projects out there of the design, and they might allow us to grab that money from the ARPA fund. So they might be available even sooner than July 1st, 2023. So that's in the works, but it appears to me that first we'll probably have to do the design of, you know, one of these projects you have on the table. Probably start with the ones that are low cost. And I guess that would be my feedback once we start diving into this a little bit, that I would probably recommend that you guys probably rate them in a way, or at least list them up in a way when you start with the most cost effective or the cheapest one, if you want to call it that, and work your way to the most expensive one. So that way we have something to show for every year. So you got cost per pound, you know, right? Is that the cost of the project, you think? Order of magnitude estimated cost, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's just based on a rule of thumb. I don't know if that included the permitting and engineering.
Right, right. I think they're just a construction cost, right? But I would say, you know, if you start with those, and maybe you sort them out by order of the magnitude estimate, and start with like the ones that's, you know, the least amount, and work your way to the top, like Stone Lane, for example, like 44.8 acres there, the $1 million one, for example, the biofiltration, probably leave that for the very end. You know, start focusing on the cheaper ones, I guess, you know what I mean? Because you gotta have people buy into it. You're gonna have to show them something before you ask them for $1 million to do bioretentions and all that. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Why couldn't they do this, you know, by the time I retired? I had to do this now. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable, Bill. Oh, well. All right, I gotta go. Thank you, Dawn, Jim. You guys can cover the rest, but we are gonna look at this table, and I'll have some suggestions for that, but I thought the overall draft was pretty good and very well done.
Yeah, one other thing we need to add into this is sort of the crosswalk with the MS4.
Yeah.
how this ties into the MFA. I mean, we talk about it a little bit in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Phosphorus control plan, but you need to tie it a little more.
Okay. Can add to it. All right, I gotta go. You guys carry on. Thank you all. And Dawn, Jim, let me know when it's done and we'll catch up tomorrow because I got a 3 to 4 to go to. Well, 2:30 to 3. I'm 10 minutes late and then I got to jump to another one, but I'll catch up with you tomorrow. And thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Aldous.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good one.
I mean, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about the schedule. It's kind of kicked out, but
Yeah,
when you guys are thinking of preparing your plan,
so I know in our original schedule, I think you guys had targeted this memo being done by, or the final products being, deliverables being done by, is it June of next year? So it seems like you're on track for sooner than that, unless I'm off.
we could be, we could
Okay, not necessarily, you might be
push it,
still shooting for
accelerate.
June. Okay. Yeah, and I think that as soon as even just seeing this draft is very helpful for me to get a better idea of what you're including. And so I will be starting on, building that bigger plan document around some of this information. And my timeline is a little longer. It'll probably be done after June of next year. But I'm also hearing from Hudson that some of these, they're very eager to get going on some of this.
What is the grant then?
The grant deadline is December of next year. So that's,
To be complete the entire plan.
so you guys on track for June is good for me.
So I think one of the things we also want to talk about, given that, was sort of the third spoke of this wheel between the structural BMPs. We've been talking about some of the non-structural, which are things like the catch basin cleaning, street sweeping, regulation side of things. But also the potential, I mean, we included it kind of in the non-structural table, but the other potential sort of restoration option that rises towards the top in this whole plan is the in-lake sediment and internal loading piece of this, which Emma, we had talked about briefly before this, but that's something that the TMDL back over 10 years ago didn't consider internal loading as an incredibly high source. We've got 10 more years of data now. Since then, that seems to indicate that potentially it is a more considerable source that we need to take into account. But the other piece of this is, as we had talked about before, we really would need more frequent data collection throughout the summer season to have an idea of how much, really it's a measure of how much area is it going anoxic within the pond, and having an idea of how much area of the bottom sediments that's covering, which then we could use to kind of generate an estimate of how much nutrients are being released from the bottom of the pond over the course of a year. So I guess that's kind of, and Don can maybe speak to this a little more, but in terms of schedule, that's right in the crux of it there is, we could either take this one way and say, we want to, whether it's through NRPC or the town or some other mechanism, we want to set the stage for taking even more water quality data next season, so we get a better picture of that and be able to incorporate in the plan itself, whether that's worth pursuing
Mhm.
or sort of, if that's not feasible within, in the next year timeframe of doing that next season, leaving that as more a little more nebulous. We know it's potentially a source. We don't have that would still be out there as a data need. That we'd still want to be looking at down the road. But Don, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to kind of the in-lake sediments and the contribution those might have would be helpful, I think.
Sure, I can. I'm Don Kretschmer. I've been helping Bill and Garrison out a little bit on some of the in-lake questions out there. I worked on the TMDL back 10, 12 years ago, did the modeling for it. And, I've looked at some of the more recent data, and Garrison's exactly right. I mean, concentrations in the deep layers of the lake have gotten quite a bit higher than they were 10, 12 years ago. So when we did the analysis 10, 12 years ago, it was a pretty insignificant source. I think it was around 2% of the total phosphorus load to the lake came from the sediments, we estimated. And granted, we didn't have great data then. And we don't have really great data now, but the data that we do have now suggests that it's a bigger number. We just don't know how big at this point. Typically, when you're addressing sediment issues, if you think about it, in its most simplistic terms, all of the phosphorus that's in the sediments of the lake came from the watershed originally. And unless you treat to the greatest extent possible the watershed sources first, if you treat the sediments, the watershed sources just end up filling in on top, and you're still in the same pickle that you were in. So we don't like saying, a whole lot about, intervening and, and dealing with sediments until we've done everything we can possibly do in the watershed. And that's both technically and financially feasible. There are lakes elsewhere in the country where, the watershed management is just not possible to an extent to make a difference. And they'll kind of do alum treatment as an interim source. And when I say alum, it's adding aluminum that permanently binds to the phosphorus and keeps it in the sediment so it doesn't come back and fuel algal blooms. Another reason that we may, it may be possible that that this internal load is causing you issues is, the fact that you have these late season blooms. And typically that happens at a time when there isn't a lot of rainfall. And I think that was also the case this year. And so the phosphorus had to be coming from somewhere during those times. And proportionally in August, September, it's entirely likely that, a fair amount of that phosphorus that fueled the blooms, may have come from the sediments. We don't know that. We don't have the data yet and haven't looked at it, but so, that's another reason to say, seasonally, while on an annual basis, internal loading might not be a big piece of the budget, seasonally it can be, and it might be, in August, September, it could be a controlling part of the load. So at some point you may have to deal with it. We just don't know whether that's now or down the road. And I think some thoughtful data collection this summer, there's an opportunity to collect enough data to really, nail this down would be really helpful. Regardless of which way, you go, whether you decide to treat the sediments or not, it'd be really good to know what that number is.
So a couple of thoughts sort of come to mind of trying to get this additional data, which is really getting more frequent temperature dissolved oxygen profile data, and perhaps some sediment samples themselves, right? Both require a little extra effort, a little more equipment. The DO temperature profile is mainly a DO temperature meter. We rely on DES. Sarah does that a couple of times a year, maybe. We're hoping to get at least monthly, maybe, yeah, at least monthly. So I don't know, is there a possibility of getting one of these meters? Is it something that could be rolled into VLAB, or could we talk to Sarah and see if she can do it, or and then there's the money to do the analysis on the sediment sampling, is there a source of funding? Is it?
Right, and I think the sediment analysis can wait a little bit until after you have the water quality data. If the water quality data suggests that you have a problem, then it's definitely worthwhile to, look at the sediments. I think the water quality data will answer the question, is there a problem now? The sediment data will answer the question in part, what can we do about it? But you need to know for sure that there's a problem now. The other piece of data, and maybe somebody on this call knows the answer to this, but right now the only depth data we have for the pond, like a depth map, is one from Fish and Game, which isn't very good. It has 10-foot contours, and we really need to know what the volumes are at different depths. So having what we call a bathymetric survey of the pond done would be really helpful. Not speaking for DES, but DES does do that on some lakes. They have some pretty good skills there. But I have no idea, whether or not you could convince them to come out and do Robinson Pond or not.
So Don, this is Jeff.
Yeah.
You may have heard that Scott Ashley just retired.
I did.
So he was sort of our bathymetry guy. So we are at a bit of a loss at the moment. That doesn't mean it won't happen again in the future.
Right.
I don't know what our situation is.
Yeah.
right now. It's certainly something, I can ask the question. I mean, we can certainly ask.
Yep.
Cost
Okay.
Steve.
Okay.
And probably need to have a conversation with Sarah, maybe, or.
Yeah, we can ask Sarah about the meters and so forth too. I know she usually, DES has some number of DO temperature meters. And I think we get some from the EPA equipment loan program every year too. So I can ask Sarah about that as well.
And you, Glenn and Jane, you could probably remind us, but I know you had mentioned there's every so often DES loans a meter to VLAB, is that right? To you guys for the season, or?
Put down every other year for a demonstration for the VLAP volunteers, just to survey our process of doing it. And they're there for that day. That's the only time that the dissolved oxygen measurement is taken. They do it when they're there. The biologist doesn't.
Okay, I thought maybe I was mistaken. I thought there was, they would rotate around meters and give meters to different lake groups
I think
every
they
so
do have-
often.
They do have some that they don't own up there, but I don't know. I don't know if we have anybody that could take the measurement. I mean, I don't know
Okay,
how complicated it is, or.
Okay.
Or people could do that themselves. So. They do have somebody that lives close by and was helping with our recent cyanobacteria bloom, bringing the samples up on his way to work. So, I mean, that might be a source of getting that data, but you have to go out in the boat, right? And they don't,
Yeah.
they would have to use somebody's boat from the lake in that case, which is, gets all complicated.
Yeah.
The idea would be when samples are collected for the VLAB process, you would also have this meter do the measurements at the same time that the samples were collected. Not create another event, but it is a question of whether somebody can
No.
do that.
Right, and you would want to collect, phosphorus samples, I think like are already collected at the surface, the surface layer, but also down deep, particularly during the times when there's no oxygen down there. To see how much is accumulating that, presumably came from the sediments.
Well, monthly, we do the deep water sampling at 2, 5, and 8 meters.
Yep.
Three layers. It's a month from May to September.
And do you analyze all of those for phosphorus as well?
Yes.
Okay.
So far, I think we only have data from July, in fact, July. We have,
September. I sent you August and September, I thought, and May and yeah, May.
last I remember is July, but
I can send you the reports. We had the deep water. I think maybe we missed 1 month. For some, the person who does it had a problem. So, but other than that, and we couldn't get tributary samples all summer.
Yeah.
So, we saved.
Because there was no flow.
There was no flow. So we saved a lot of money, for the testing, because it costs like $50, a site. We have 6 sites. So, or more than $50. And they weren't posting the results for the phosphorus, though. There was some problem that they weren't posting it. But they were measuring it. They assured us they were measuring it, but they, so Sarah knows what that's all about. And she has all those records, so. But the September one has all the whole, goes from May to September. It has all the data from May to September, and I can send you that.
that'd be great.
I'll go out on a limb. How accurate does the depth have to be? You mentioned that the state did it sometime, and it's very rudimentary. About 25 years ago, I took my little depth meter and ran across the lake 15 times and recorded it on some kind of voice recorder, and then I plotted it out and things like that. And I have that from 20 years ago, 25 years ago.
Probably is good enough. What do you think, Don?
Well, I mean, it may be better than what we have.
Okay,
It's certainly worth looking at.
sure. Yeah, I can go find it and send you a copy. It's not very big, and again, I was doing it as a lark. Just to see what was
Right.
happening.
See, you never know when it'll come in handy.
Yeah.
I've seen the bathymetric map of Robinson Pond, but I don't know what the date on it is. But I've seen that, 15 years ago, I saw it.
Yeah, there's one that's readily available on Fish and Game site. And but it only has, where it's greater than 10 feet and where it's greater than 20 feet. And so, we don't even have the deepest spot on that map. It's not as useful as it might be.
Well, you have where we take the deep water sample, and that's the deepest part of the lake.
Yep.
You know that for a fact.
Yeah,
Yep,
we got
we-
that.
And there are some sandbars toward the middle of the lake, but they don't. I'd have to go look to see what's recorded on them, how deep they are. But
Mhm.
the swamps at both ends don't contribute phosphorus to the lake itself. Just a general question.
You want to answer that, Don?
Well, sure, I'll give it a try. I think they probably do at least seasonally. I think probably, during the growing season, they may end up trapping phosphorus, but during the rest of the year, when it's not growing, they may end up releasing some back. One of the things that we've seen in a lot of lakes, especially across northern zones like northern New England, is that as we have warmer and warmer weather, decomposition is happening quicker in wetlands, particularly wetlands, big wetland systems. And so decomposition is happening, and our lakes are becoming browner as that organic matter is released into the lakes. And that's just related to longer period of warm weather and quicker decomposition. So with that decomposition probably comes additional nutrients that were trapped, eons ago, maybe being released. And we just
Okay.
don't have the data to say that for sure, but I suspect if lakes are getting browner, that there's more nutrients coming in as well.
Was there ever a septic system survey down around the lake? Like I thought I read that.
I don't think so, but I know several years ago, somebody, when they sold their property, they had to go through a stringent state, something or other, and
But then on the other hand, septic fields don't last forever, and every time somebody replaces them, it's now recorded at the state or the town level. So it's pretty accurate. You could, certainly you get a date of when it was done.
We could do that search. We haven't done that search. I don't know if the town gets records. Do you know
We
that?
could potentially help with that. We have some records. I'd say from 2000 to on. You have a pretty good shot of us having that record scanned somewhere. Before that, it's the Wild West, but we could certainly help with that. Scroll through our building department files and see if we can find
Give designs too.
most of the time, yeah. Again, from 2000 on, yeah.
Yeah, that could give us a good sense of, are the majority around the lake, have they been replaced recently in the last 20 years, or are they older than that?
How far back from the lake would that information be valuable? Are we talking across the road or just from the road to the lake?
I mean, yeah, I'd say for now, it would be worth just getting both sides of the road. And it really, so with septics, it really depends on the soils, obviously, and how well the soils are draining. And most of the soil around the lake, according to USDA, is fairly well drained. So that it could be that with well drained soil, a septic that's further away from the lake is that leachate is making its way to the lake. So the state actually regulates, if it is well drained soils, it needs to be set back further because of that. But we don't, we don't know
You were
where.
just looking for location or more information about the septic fields. There's very few houses on the pond, so, and most of them, 90% of them are on Hazelwood.
Yeah.
I can go walking down the street, I can see where half of them are.
Yeah.
Because they have the standing pipes.
Well, ultimately, I mean, in a perfect world, ultimately both would be helpful because the location is obviously helpful of how close it is to the pond, but also design too of, we don't know, if it was designed for, when one person was living there and now there are 3 people year round, or
Well,
we-
it's on Robinson Pond, it's usually the opposite.
Yeah.
Residents are getting older.
But the point of design is there are fairly standard septic designs, but
Yeah.
if you're getting into, especially around lakes and ponds, if you're getting into lots that have certain constraints. They're smaller lots. They've got water on one side, they've got wells on the other side. There may be some kind of alternative designs that they have to use to squeeze something in a certain space. So not to say that that's happening but it would be good to at least, double check.
Well,
That
yeah,
is very common in Hudson.
yeah, and especially in Hazelwood, they're all small lots. But they all went through the state, got approved by the state or the town or whoever
Right.
approves them.
Right. But I'm aware of one house on Hazelwood that has added bedrooms, has expanded, but did not expand their septic system. And they're thinking about selling the house and now it's causing a problem. So, or maybe they already have sold the house. There was an agreement in place, but I am aware that at least one house on Hazelwood is potentially a problem.
Yeah, we
Some of
can
the
talk
ones-
if I know that one house just sold and it was on a very substandard lot. And they put in a high-tech leach field.
Hmm.
And the house is not sold.
We'll talk after.
There's some houses too that are across the road that are close to the tributary sites,
Right.
like we have one house that has a culvert right in their front yard that's coming down from Beechwood. It's the street above us, and that comes into one of our sampling sites, so you do have to go back
Yeah.
on it to some extent, certain places. And up there on Boulder and Stony Lane, that cul-de-sac there and everything, that's just going down, so. I think this, so sweeping is one thing. I mean, I was quite concerned because we didn't get swept until like August or something, I know they do one end of town one year and another end the next year after they do the main town center. But, and I called up about it because, I knew that we were going through all this and I said, there was no more sand on the road by the time, they came around to collect it. And, they had the broken sweepers, was in the shop or whatever, they were aware, and they would get there, but. Like you said, prioritize maybe for this year.
I can see salt on the roads, but phosphorus, what is that from dog poop or is that the main contribution from the road?
But it's just an atmospheric dust, really.
Okay.
But it's, tract of sand tires and cars and, sand eroding onto the roads.
Right, and as well as leaves, grass clippings, fertilizer over spray. And all of those things have no opportunity to be, caught by the soil if they're on the road. So they end up typically getting hard piped right to the downstream water body. So that's the reason you want to get them off. If leaves fall in your yard, the nutrients that are in them end up, getting attached to soil particles if they're in the yard, but not necessarily if they're in the road.
Okay.
So the long and short, of it, there are lots of sources. There's lots of projects, but each one doesn't, only does so much, and it's gonna take a lot of things to get to a meaningful level of reduction. Which is usual in every lake. It's not unusual. It takes a long time to get to reducing loads. It took a long time to build it up and create the loads. Takes a while to get them down.
So I think this stage, I mean, I know we have maybe about 20 minutes left. Kind of this stage, where we're at is we've we've kind of, as I mentioned earlier, we've kind of gone through our structural BMPs and sort of narrowed down that list of what seems to be most feasible and rises to the top of the list. And what we're continuing to work on is a lot of what we discussed today of the non-structural stuff, kind of the regulatory side of things, the zoning. And the in-lake sediments, and further data collection. I guess we certainly wanted to have an opportunity too, to open up the floor and, just get feedback too on whether there's, whether anybody thinks there's anything out there that we've missed, if there are any, anything else that we could be incorporating into this, things that we're off base on anything, or just any general questions about about this memo so far. I know you guys haven't really had a chance to read it.
In the sediment stuff, what would be a meaningful, a single sample at some point in time or any time of the sediment with at 2 or 3 places on the lake? That's not a big job.
Well, and Don could probably speak a little more to this, but I think the actual collection of it isn't always all that difficult. It does have to be done in a pretty precise way. It's not just like going down and taking a scoop. We'll really take a core, so try to get something, like a tube that's going straight down into the sediment, so the depths of the sediment that you're sampling.
Okay.
But some of the difficulty comes in the actual analysis, because what we're actually looking for in sediment is some of the nutrient concentrations, but also other metal concentrations in the sediment. So iron and aluminum, how much of that is already in the sediment, which that can help us determine, if a treatment would be worthwhile or not. So the sampling has to be a bit precise, and the actual analysis is fairly involved too. I don't know if Don, you want to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty descriptive of what would be done. One of the difficulties in doing sediment analysis is there's only a couple labs that can handle the types of analyses that are most useful. And basically what that is doing is figuring out all of the things that phosphorus is bound to. Is it bound to aluminum in the sediments, iron, organic matter? Is it just floating around? And doing that kind of analysis. I mean, I tend to send a lot of samples out to Wisconsin. One of the universities out there can do them. Apparently they can do them in Maine, although I'm not sure if they take out of state samples at this point. But there's only a couple labs that can actually do that analysis, and it's not real cheap. If you were looking towards, I'm talking several steps ahead, but if you determined that there was enough phosphorus potentially coming out of the sediments that you might want to treat it, you would probably want to collect 5 to 7 sediment samples in a lake the size of Robinson Pond to sort of design a treatment plan. If you just wanted to find out a little bit about what the phosphorus is in the lake, 2 or 3 might be okay. But it isn't until you know kind of where you're going with it that you would know how many you would want to take. But
First, we should stick with the water instead of.
you should start with the water and nail that down and figure out whether or not you have a problem. And there's reasonable guess that you do have more than you had before. We just don't know how much. Does that make sense?
Sure. I didn't realize it was so hard to take a sample that would give you good information.
So much.
Yeah, so what we're really looking at is that portion of the sediment that interacts with the water column. And typically we like to look at like the top 4 inches or 10 centimeters. It's about the same number. And so you want to, capture that fairly precisely. And then, the analysis is, the key from there. And the samples have to be handled and shipped out overnight. And there's a little bit of a process. And unfortunately, the analysis isn't cheap. The shipping isn't cheap. There's lots of things that are, aren't real cheap. I mean, it's not ridiculously expensive. A lake like Robinson you might be talking 5,000 to 10,000, somewhere in there, to do sediment sampling.
Okay.
So,
Analysis or sampling?
yeah, so that's both.
Okay,
And probably 40 to 50% would be the analysis. And the rest is shipping and labor to get out there and collect the samples and do all that stuff.
is
And,
it time sensitive? Do you have to, like the other stuff we do to the state, does it have to be in the water and then to the analysis people in 24 hours or something like that?
No, it doesn't, but it has to be kept cold. So typically if I'm shipping things like to Wisconsin, I try to do it overnight, or if it's not summertime, do it second day with a lot of ice, just to make sure that they stay cold. If you're hand delivering them, you can refrigerate them for, a couple of days before you bring them to the lab. And it doesn't really matter what time of year the sediments are the sediments. Doesn't matter if you do them this year versus next year. Those numbers don't change real quick, which isn't surprising. If you think about it, this is the, accumulation over 150 years. One more year, more or less, isn't going to change for the numbers very much.
Thanks, Don.
Yep.
One thing that's a bit different in this watershed, that there aren't any large parcels, parking lots that are easier to treat. It's all street runoff, which makes for narrow areas to fit in BMPs. Which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing that you don't have a lot of parking lots to be a source of a load, but it's hard to fit these BMPs along side roadways where there's narrow areas to work with. You can only make them so big.
What type of things would that be? I mean, it would be something different at the beach or the boat launch, or that then would be at a cul-de-sac, for instance. What would be the structure look like? Just a drain?
On a road. I mean, it would be kind of a shallow basin, maybe a rain garden type thing. There are more engineered type things like a concrete block sort of thing with engineered sand, sort of a sand filter kind of thing that we do, but those involve a little more, they're a little more delicate, and a little more need more maintenance. I would prefer more the open garden, rain garden type thing, but they do, they can only capture so much water.
Get it down.
Right, and that's part of it too, is that, it's, in some of these cases, we do have potentially a large area that would drain to a certain place. But the problem is at that spot where it drains to, we don't have enough space that would allow us to treat all the water from that entire area. So sometimes there's that mismatch of, there may be the potential to treat a large space, but we don't have the space to actually install the treatment. Unless, like Bill said, there are engineered systems out there that could be squeezed into a smaller space, but then you're talking about upping the cost and the maintenance and. Right.
You have a problem? Lots of problems.
Well, so I think that, that's the point here that we're looking at, where are the easier spaces where we could install something structural? Where can we, find those kind of little pockets of the watershed that something could go in and combined with all these other aspects, make some meaningful reductions here. But as you know, between the space constraints and funding constraints, and it's not all gonna be just we're putting things in the ground. It's gonna have to be a holistic structural BMPs and some non-structural, some more
in some educational pieces, trying to do some
Yeah.
behavioral change, like try not to dump grass clippings
Directly into. the pond.
directly into the, yeah, or applying fertilizer right up to the road or there's, these,
New Hampshire Lakes has a lot of good information on all of that.
yeah.
Their Lake Smart program and things. And I don't know, there was one program they said about was your pond, Lake Smart, and I think it was in relation to the boat launch kind of thing, they would come out and do a talk or something about
Mhm.
how you just prove it. So I don't know if you looked at a lot of their stuff online, but they have a whole Lake Smart program. Everything where private residents have them come to their property and tell them what to do to improve their thing.
And that may be something that's, worthwhile here, if there's interest and effort with the Friends group, if you guys have others who may be interested in helping. That's one method of kind of getting public engagement and getting folks, the whole idea behind Lake Smart is you get something for it, you get an award. That, hopefully the idea is sort of seeing your neighbors doing it and people learning from others of how to be good waterfront stewards.
I forward a lot of their stuff to the lakefront owners, especially like leaf raking and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know. They're neighbors and you can only say so much. So,
You guys have annual meetings that,
it's just, I'm lucky to have the 5 or 6 VLAP volunteers I have to do it. And, they've been very committed and dedicated. When they go and we go, I don't know how it's gonna be. But we try and hit new neighbors and things. We always approach them, and tell them about the pond and the group and what we're doing and.
who makes up the Friends of Robbins Pond? Is that-
Makes it up.
Is there a small group? Who's a member of that?
There's people that live in the neighborhood, but then there's other people on Stony Lane or she's a VLAP volunteer and. Does, so people from other streets that don't live right on the pond, but, we have
Anybody that shows an interest is a
anybody,
member.
yeah. Can be,
Well, how many members would you say?
I'd say probably 25 or 30 is my email,
That's the interested people.
that's the people that I have their emails for and. And we used to have an annual cleanup in May, just go over and do the beach and the boat launch and Robinson Road, which always had trash and stuff on it, but the last 2 years with COVID, we haven't done it, and this was always a meet your neighbors kind of thing. And but we had a lot of dog walkers. We had a big contingent of ducks this year, and I don't know if that contributed to our problem this year. And the geese, things like that, and there's not that many people that have the chemical companies come treat their lawns. There are some, but there's always a few. So, and the tree cutting. Every time I hear a chainsaw, I say, well, people move out here because they like the trees, and then they move in and cut them down. That makes sense. So,
That's more people than I thought you were gonna say.
well, we have a couple,
But there's only like 10 active people.
yeah.
But they at least haven't told you to stop talking to them.
so far. Yeah. So. I'd like to take maybe a couple of these, because we do have a couple of people, one is out of town, and it's easier to just hand it to them than to
Sure.
ask them to read it.
Two.
And I did print out the September VLAP results, but I don't see any of the total phosphorus numbers on here because, she wasn't giving them to me. She said she had them. They had taken the samples, they had analyzed, they had the numbers. But for some reason, they couldn't post it. So I don't know. We hoped it would be ready by the time they had to do their annual report. So I think that's the column anyway. You can look at this and say that.
I think there's typically a little delay between.
Oh,
That's all right.
It's on scrap paper.
You want me to make a copy of it?
You can email it.
Yeah, I can email.
You have it digitally.
Okay. I just copied it off. Yeah, but. So I don't know, there's we have had Amy Magula come down at one point a few years ago and just giving presentations to our selectmen and conservation commission and everything. But we had a big gathering of at the police station conference room, to do her presentation, and then we met over at the beach on picnic tables over there, and she demonstrated how to do the sampling and things, and it was all about the weed, the invasives and everything, and how to identify them. And, we publicized it like crazy, and I think we had like 30 people at the police station, but, and then we got a weed watchers committee. We divided the lake into 6 sections, and people would be responsible for looking and seeing new growth, old growth, no growth, That sort of petered out. So,
well, but then again, on the herbicide treatments have drastically reduced the invasive weeds too.
Yeah, it sounded like from what I remember, this was a pretty good year
Yeah,
from the invasives point of
I
view.
think they just did the survey a couple of weeks ago. I saw the airboat out there. The one thing I didn't mention too is I think we have a capital reserve fund already for Robinson Pond established. So.
I'll check that out.
We haven't been putting money into it regularly, but we originally were putting some in it every year, we wanted to put some in it every year for the treatments, to pay for the treatments. Right now, I think they're coming in the Conservation Commission's budget.
Correct.
Their budget.
Herbicide treatments.
But we did have a warrant article and established a capital reserve fund, so I heard somebody mention, putting, establishing, Otis said establish a capital reserve fund. It's already one there.
Okay, well, I think as we're kind of getting close to the end here. I think our next steps, obviously continuing to plug away on our non-structural BMP estimates. I think, Don, if you guys could help us out with some septic research. That would be great. And then, Emma, perhaps we put our heads together about sort of next season's schedule and
Yeah.
what we think may be feasible.
Might make sense, okay.
And if you can share that map,
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. That would be great.
don't expect too much now.
You can even find it.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
Jeff, you had a couple of things on your list.
Yeah, Sarah for equipment. Dave about potential bathymetry, just in case. I think that was it.
Yeah.
One more question from the participants we had an unusual number of pine logs float up this year. I don't know if you're aware that Robinson Pond was a depository for pine logs during the hurricane, but would that contribute to the phosphorus loading? Because when they pop up, they're pretty good shape.
Eight popped up,
Eight or 10 this year.
8 or 10 this year.
We haven't had any, that's only like one every couple of years. before.
Oh, it's interesting. I'm not sure why they would have popped up now. I mean, typically wood decomposes really slowly.
Yeah.
So they're not a huge piece of the puzzle. And yeah, I mean, that also speaks to the fact that you've probably not had much oxygen down at the bottom for a long time. If they're well preserved and, still look really sound. Under low oxygen, they don't rot very quickly. But in terms of a nutrient load, the logs in themselves probably not a big deal.
Okay.
We had a very low lake level this year, as opposed to last year, it was very high. So the fluctuation was just,
Very noticeable,
very noticeable this year.
like 1.5 to 2 feet.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how many lakes were filled with logs during, especially the hurricane of 38.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you cut those logs in half, just cut them through it. They're weight on the inside, just like you cut them down.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
So we are sort of tentatively scheduled to meet again in May, next May.
For our final project meeting.
Yeah, yep. So let's tentatively plan on that.
Mhm.
And it sounds like if anybody has feedback on any of this, make sure to get it over.
Yeah.
It's not to say it could be moved to April if we wanted to or something.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. I think, we'd certainly. Seems like at this pace, we'd certainly be trying to get, be circulating final drafts in the springtime, early in the springtime, so. And maybe after we talk, Emma, maybe that changes, but, that's sort of where we're at for now.
Thanks, you guys, for joining in.
Yeah.
And Jeff, good to see you. Don, good to see you. Sorry, I was late.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming. I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.